Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alex Cloherty. I'm a marketing and communications specialist here at Oncode Accelerator, and on behalf of Oncode Accelerator, I'm happy to invite you to this webinar. Briefly, some general housekeeping notes before we dive into the meat of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and transcribed, and to keep the recording clean, your microphones will be muted. So we ask you to please type your questions in the Q&A box. We've allocated time at the end of the webinar to address questions and remarks, but you can type your questions at any point throughout the hour we have together today. Also good to know, the webinar is not official advice. Every project is different, as we will get into later. So this is meant for educational purposes only. As the webinar is recorded, you can also find it back on our website later on this week, so you can refer back to it again in the future. Now, before we get to our main speakers today, I want to provide a very brief introduction to Oncode Accelerator. We are a program composed of more than 35 public and private partners, and we're funded through the Dutch National Growth Fund. And over the next 10 years, all of us are working together to achieve a shared mission, to collaboratively optimize and accelerate the development of new cancer therapies for the benefit of patients of all ages. So how will we do this? A lot of that optimization and acceleration comes down to our innovation platforms, so well-defined patient cohorts, organoids, and artificial intelligence. And by integrating these innovation platforms into the drug development pipelines for oncology drugs, we aim to accelerate the process, for example, by integrating access to real-world data, clinically relevant models, and of course, harnessing the power of AI early on to accelerate preclinical development of cancer therapies along 4 different pipelines or work streams. So we focus on 4 different work streams that represent 4 key types of cancer therapies, those being therapeutic vaccines, cell and gene therapy, biologics, and small molecules. And by overlaying the innovation platforms over these work streams, that's how we aim to accelerate the development of cancer therapies. And this is done through demonstrator projects. Our strategy with demonstrator projects comes down to overlaying the platforms over these work streams, alongside, of course, the integration of regulatory innovation, which is part of the focus of today's webinar. Demonstrator projects, i.e. preclinical drug discovery and development projects that are done through us. Well, we welcome anybody to apply for demonstrator projects. Anybody around the world can apply. And what's in it for you if you work with us on these demonstrator projects? We aim to help you to bridge the gap between early discovery and eventually driving impact for patients, as you'll see throughout this webinar. We also provide co-funding, but that's not all. We facilitate connections between experts from all different phases of drug development across the pipelines represented by our work streams, and can connect you to experts across our innovation platforms. On top of this, by becoming a demonstrator project partner, you can also access our innovative infrastructure. So that's enough about Oncode Accelerator for now, aside from a thank you to our partners, without whom this would not be possible. And without further ado, we'll get into the main topic of today. Today, you'll hear from 2 people from the Oncode Accelerator Foundation, central coordination for our program. We'll start out with Mark Krul. He's our CSO and member of the board of Oncode Accelerator Foundation, and he'll provide an overview of the drug development journey as pertaining to cancer therapies. And thereafter, we'll hear from Evelien, program manager, regulatory innovation at Oncode Accelerator Foundation, and she'll get into regulatory considerations that developers of cancer therapies should be aware of. So, with that said, Mark, the floor is yours. Please take us away.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. Well, I think the opening slide already mentions a little bit what it's all about in drug development. You need to start, if you start developing your drug, with in your mind how the label in the end, the product on the market should look like. And we'll come to that throughout this presentation and explain why this is so important. Can I have the next slide, please? I will start with a very brief history back look, how things have started with cancer therapy, and then take you through the current developments. As you all know, the traditional approaches, surgery has been there for a very long time before any of the other therapies were available. And the traditional approaches were mainly surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Actually, the drug development part, the chemotherapy, started after the Second World War with mustard gas as a starting point, in which they saw that a lot of cells were killed. And with modifications, it became the first chemotherapeutic agents for cancer patients. Later on, the NCI, especially in the US, performed a screening of 60,000 individual compounds derived from plants. And one of the most predominant agents that came forward was Taxol or docetaxel and some of the derivatives thereof. And in the 1970s, this has become a major breakthrough in the field of cancer therapies. And they are still present and used a lot. And many different compounds came forward. And then if you look further forward, we got more insights in the genomic alterations in tumors. And I think the best example of such a targeted therapy is Gleevec, which is an exceptional case where there was a translocation and a therapy has been developed exactly to that translocation. And for the specific tumor type, stromal tumors, it's changed from 0% survival to 100% survival. And as you're all familiar with, nowadays we are in the field of the immunotherapies, and at present even at the individual-based cell-based therapies. Next slide, please. So this is a different picture of how the field has developed. If you look at the left side, in 1995, we had only limited interest from pharmaceutical industry and cancer drug development because there was nothing there. There was nothing to develop. So that's pretty weird at that time. And we had lung cancer, breast cancer, so anatomic-based disease. After becoming of the first therapies, a number of other players came in. So pharma was awake that this was a big industry, and we got disease subsets. So as you know, for instance, if you look at breast cancer, we have HER2 positive breast cancer, which are treated different than BRCA1 positive breast cancers. So coming from an organ, we look at genetic mutations. And nowadays, actually, it's the biggest industry in the pharma oncology. And what you see is that from the original blockbusters, colon cancer, one drug, all patients, we now have more niche busters for specific mutations. So it's smaller patient groups, but highly specific. The next slide, please. Over here, you see an overview of how a typical drug development process looks like. So we start at the left side with the target validation, like, for instance, the discovery that HER2 is overexpressed in breast cancer. And then you start with sometimes even with million compound screening on cancer cells with HER2, without HER2, and you try to find a compound that is killing specifically. Then in the green bar, you see the lead optimization. Once you have a hit that it might be a potential drug, you start to optimize it, and you move into a clinical candidate with the right properties, like ADME, is it degraded fast, etc. Of the million compounds you start with, you end approximately with 6 compounds that enter the clinic. And of those 6 compounds, you go through a phase 1 just to test whether it's safe. So you give increasing dose of your drug, and thereafter, if it's safe, you start testing for some efficacy, phase 2. And then if it looks efficacious, then you start your phase 3 trial to compare it with the golden standard. And in the end, you can move it to registration. Yeah, the next slide I was going to ask indeed. But this is a very long model. If you look from the target discovery up to the registration, which is the bar completely at the downside of this slide, you see that it takes 14 years, so 10 to 20 years to get it from the start till a registration, which is of course a very, very long time. If you look at the bar immediately beneath the colored bar, you see the cost of such a drug development process. And where you see that in the beginning, the target validation, the lead optimization, the costs are not the extreme high. Most of the costs are in the clinical phase, especially the phase 2 and phase 3 trials are very expensive. And if you go through the whole process, it's $1 billion. 1 to 2 billion is an average size for the cost of a drug development. And that money needs to be earned back, of course, by the pharmaceutical industry. But what's more stunning, and that's the middle bar, if you look to the chances that a product reaches the next phase, you see that in the initial part, the target discovery, 80% of the compounds can move forward. Then you get a 75% chance to move to the preclinical part. But as soon as you move into phase 1, you see it's only a 50% of the compounds that go through. And especially in phase 2A, there you see a very steep drop. Only 103 compounds make it. And in the end, from the start till the end, only 1 to 2% and 1 to 10% reaches the end, which of course for $1 to $2 billion is a very bad result. And the main reason is that we can test everything in the early part in the preclinical, and we show that it's safe for mice and it cures all the mice. But as soon as we move into phase 1, we finally have the first human data where a lot of the toxicity still is unknown and a number of the compounds fail. But thereafter, does it really work in men? There's the big failure. So all the preclinical work does not predict good enough the outcome in the clinical phase in humans. And that's actually the goal of Oncode Accelerator, the yellow part in this bar. Ensure that your predictability of your compound is much higher, which will save a lot of time and costs. Next slide, please. Just a slide to show from a CRO how complex this development process is. They depicted a metro map. You can put the bar above. Next slide, please, of the development process. And actually, for getting an approval of your drug, you have to stop at each station of this metro map. You have to do a number of experiments. You have to file that in a proper way. And only if you visited all the stations in a proper way, then you can file your drug in the end. And this is very critical because a lot of people believe that the preclinical part is not that relevant. It's only about clinical trials and getting it filed. But any mistake you make in the beginning part will withhold your registration in the end. So also from target discovery and the lead, there's already very important to take your regulatory affairs into account. Next slide. And this is actually what I already described. The part of Oncode Accelerator on the left, the preclinical part. How can we ensure that as soon as a product moves into the clinic, the predictability is much better than it's currently done. And in the clinical development, of course, we like to use the patient data, etc., for using the right patient selection. And I think for the sake of time, I will move already on to the next slide. So where Oncode Accelerator focuses really on the preclinical and the early part, regulatory affairs starts also from the very beginning, but moves on completely to the end. So it's any experiment, because for the filing, it's extremely relevant. Well, I think that this is in a nutshell how the development process looks like. So 10 to 20 years, 1 to 2 billion, and the predictability is very poor. So we need to improve. And if you really would like to have develop, that's good to have the next slide. So what we actually like to do is develop the best drug in the best way, and we would like to develop that single wonder drug. So please, next slide. This is how we develop a wonder drug. As you can see, the doctor tells to the patient, we've got a new wonder drug. We give it to you and we'll just wonder what it will do. And I think that's not exactly the right way. And Evelien will take over now and explain that it's not just giving a drug to somebody and see what it does, but it takes a lot of effort and regulatory affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. So, yes, thank you, Alex. So in the coming session, I would like to inform you about some basic regulatory principles and pathways in drug development. I will focus on the EU situation, but I think the principles will be applicable worldwide. And I would like to start with a firm statement. Without regulatory affairs, there would be no medicinal products on the market. So as Mark already explained, regulatory affairs is key in the process of drug development and also thereafter. And it has to be taken into account from early stages on. So questions that are relevant throughout the entire development process are, for example, what disease do I want to cure? What medicine am I developing? What mechanism of action is involved? How can I manufacture my drug? Can it be handled and stored by a patient? What is the safety profile? But also, how can I best design my trials in order to show efficacy and safety? And do the benefits outweigh the risks in the end? So next slide, please. So overseeing all these strategies, the main goal will always be to control the safety, efficacy, and the quality of the product, aiming this positive balance in benefit risk. And this will apply to any product, whether you are developing an ATMP or a small molecule. This will be the main questions to be answered throughout this development process. Well, in order to guide developers and regulators in this process, there are several guidelines and directives that indicate the requirements and directions. And I will elaborate on that part later on. Next slide, please. So why do we need regulatory compliance? The initiative for guidance was set up after the thalidomide incident, which happens in the 1950s. This medicine was prescribed for morning sickness in pregnant women, and the babies of these patients had severe birth defects, showing a range of severe deformities, for example, in the limbs, eyes, and the heart. And it's estimated that over 10,000 babies were actually affected by this. The product was on the market in over 40 countries. So this led to the development of drug regulation and monitoring in many of these countries. Next slide, please. So here I want to show some examples of laws and directives that are currently in place. In the Netherlands, we know the Geneesmiddelenwet. On a European level, there is a directive. But besides this, there's also ICH guidelines worldwide that are important in drug development. But also regulations for example, clinical trials in the clinical trial regulation, but also GMP, GCP, so good clinical practice and good manufacturing practice are important. I wanted to show you the example of the patient leaflet and the SMPC. These are very tangible results actually of a lot of regulatory actions that have been taken before. So it all comes together in these two documents. Next slide, please. So anyone who uses medicinal products should be able to trust them on their safety, efficacy, and quality. And what is shown here is examples of authorities who regulate these medicines. So they closely work together in a network on specific procedures, but also when it's needed, for example, when safety comes in place. And several specific procedures and actions are actually coordinated by EMA. I will come to that later. Next slide, please. So anyone who uses, oh, sorry. So this is a non-conclusive list of experts involved in these assessments of pharmaceuticals. For example, in the Netherlands, the MEB is responsible for assessments, and well, you can have a look at the website also what kind of people actually do these assessments of the medicinal product. In the Netherlands, the college is appointed by the Minister of Health. Next slide. So authorization can take place at several different levels. National level, where just one authority in one country is involved. You only want your product to be on the market in this one specific country. Decentralized, where different member states work together, but there's also a centralized procedure in which all the member states in Europe are working together and which is coordinated by EMA. So Oncode Accelerator focuses on new therapies for oncologies, and these are always being submitted via decentralized procedure. Next slide. So marketing authorization. How do I get one? So what is a marketing authorization? It is actually a license to sell a medicine. So it is assessed by competent authorities. The benefit risk assessment needs to be positive, and it's provided nationally or by the European Commission. There is an important note. So if you submit a full dossier, quite a technical story maybe, but then you get 8 years of data protection. And this means that, for example, a generic product cannot be submitted via an application. It also provides you with 10 years of market protection, which means that these generic products cannot enter the market. And there is a difference between a marketing authorization and a patent, for example. So a patent is regulated by patent law. There is no direct involvement of regulatory authorities, but it also makes that competitors cannot enter the market. Next slide, please. So how do I get this marketing authorization? You have to submit your dossier. Next slide, please. So what does it look like, this medicinal product, the dossier? It's a large collection of documents describing the characteristics, the studies, the trials, but also, for example, adverse events associated with the medicine. And this dossier is called the CTR, the Common Technical Document. So you hand in your dossier at an authority. Then the procedure takes about 210 days, but including the clock stop, the median amount of time such a submission takes is about 337 days. And a dossier is huge. It contains thousands of pages with information specific for that medicinal product. Next slide, please. So the dossier is divided in 5 modules, and each module contains specific information, which is also showed on the next slide. So on top, you see module 1 that contains administrative information, the application form, but also this SMPC and patient leaflet. Module 2, the summaries and overviews. In module 3, the quality is outlined. So how is your product made? How should it be stored? Module 4 contains the non-clinical study reports. And in module 5, you'll learn more about the data from clinical trials, but also the published literature is available in this module. Next slide, please. So if you want to know more about this, you can go to the European Commission's website. Volume 2B contains the notice to applicants, and it outlines what information should be where, and how it is stored in this dossier. Next slide. So I also wanted to sum up some ICH guidelines on the non-clinical development phase. So these are important for drug development, and these can help you to understand the matter and the design of your experiments. So please have a look if you want to know more about these. So in the coming slides, I want to show you some examples of the latest regulatory developments in relation to the Oncode Accelerator program. Next slide, please. So new approach methodologies. Not only we are working with organoids, which is a new approach methodology, but there's also an ongoing tendency of increased interest in this platform technology worldwide, but also from EMA. So a recent study has shown the evaluation from an EMA perspective, and it shows that these methodologies can improve the detection of human toxicological events, streamline the pipeline, but also reduce the costs. So they are increasingly being used in academia and in small medium enterprises. And the amount of discussion on 3R, for example, in ITF meetings and scientific advices is increasing. But it also shows that there is that these discussions lead to joint learning for both the regulator as well as the applicant. Next slide, please. So another example for this drug, organ-on-a-chip models have shown the potential to measure cardiac toxicity. And these support the utility of organ-on-a-chip models for predictive insights prior to clinical trials. And these can really help to improve these clinical trial designs. Yes, next slide, thank you. Regarding the use of patient cohorts and patient data, we have seen that real-world data from colorectal cancer patients have been used as a control arm to show efficacy of immunotherapy. So if you are interested to learn more, please go to our website. There is a lecture from Mirjam Koopman, and she will explain more about it. Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. An early interaction with regulators will help you to get your development strategy right. Next slide, please. So the focus of Oncode Accelerator is in a non-clinical development phase. And that is why we are constantly looking for opportunities to discuss the validation of our platforms with regulators like EMA. And EMA has several options to discuss this matter. So next slide, please. So academia briefing meetings, innovation task force meetings, also national scientific advice. So from our own MEB is in scope. And EMA offers scientific advice as well as simultaneous scientific advice. So then you can choose which countries you want to ask your advice, but it will be one outcome from all those parties. And there is also an option for qualification advice in which you can qualify a specific method. Next slide, please. So here again, the Oncode Accelerator infrastructure. As you can see, our regulatory innovation workstream is involved in all the work streams and platforms. And we are scouting for regulatory opportunities to make our program stronger and to solve issues early on. So as we've shown before on the timeline, how can we set up our strategy in a way that in the end, the product can go to the clinical phase. Next slide. So this is the team regulatory innovation. Marieke de Bruin from Utrecht University, Marion Pasmoy, CBG MEB, Laurens Bloem, Utrecht University, and also Janne Hoekman from Utrecht University. What this workstream is really focusing on, next slide, please, Patient cohorts, AI, organoids, these are new platform technologies. So there is no or limited regulatory guidance available. And our workstream is preparing the program by searching regulatory pathways and by having this ongoing dialogue with the regulators. So this is being done by the regulatory science platforms. We do this on platform technologies. So we are working on a user-friendly database from EMA, but also we are measuring regulatory readiness and regulatory impact. So what does our project actually develop, and how can we impact the regulatory landscape? So these projects will be briefly touched upon hereafter. Next slide, yes. So patient cohorts. This will be a collaboration between MEB and Utrecht University, and we are reviewing the data concerning anti-cancer medicinal products throughout the regulatory product life cycle. So we'll be looking at what kind of scientific advices have been in place, what kind of meetings were applicable to these products, but also what did the Praak, de Comp, de CAP, have they been involved in decision making? And based on this initial project, the priorities for follow-up research will be defined. Next slide. So we'll also be looking at organoids as a collaboration between MEB and the Princess Maxima Center. So retrospectively, can we find evidence for the use of organoids to support pharmacodynamics or efficacy? We want to better understand the current situation. So by interviewing regulators, we would like to know what the tendency regarding acceptancy is. And also we will be looking at a database overviewing all the different types of organoids that are being used currently. Next slide, please. So this shows regulatory science on AI, collaboration between CBG and Universiteit Leiden. Again, we would like to know what is already available in literature based on regulatory reviews. Is AI already being used in scientific advice, but also data mapping? And we would like to generate some preclinical evidence. Is, for example, imaging being used for scoring of pathology? So these are different ways to use AI in regulatory affairs, but we would like to know what is the current status and how can we use this information in our project. Next slide, please. As I briefly mentioned before, we will also be looking at the regulatory status and impact, and we are working on a searchable database of all EMA registered medicinal products. And we hope to use this information within our program to make sure that we can compare what we are developing against what is already being developed and how can we use this information. And in the end, this database will be available for the public as well. Next slide, please. So all of these results will be used within the activities of the workstream, but also for the platform itself. So enhancing the dialogue, we will link the regulatory science outcomes to the platforms and the projects within the program. But we would also like to provide our members with knowledge, regulatory knowledge, for example, via workshops. Well, this was my last slide. We would really like to hear from you if there's any topics you would like to learn more about in the future. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And I will now hand over to Alex again.
Thanks very much both for your presentations, and we're now happy to take questions from the audience. I see that we have some activity there. So far, just one comment from our side that you can, as Evelien said, give us some information about what you would like to learn more about in the future, both as it pertains to regulatory innovation, but also in general, how Oncode Accelerator can support you as a potential demonstrator project partner. Please click the link that was just shared by our colleague Saskia in the Q&A box in order to fill that out. There is lots of time for people to ask questions, so please don't hesitate. But perhaps to start us off, we can start with a question for you, Evelien. Could you provide in a little bit more detail the information behind the database project that you mentioned on one of your last slides, that you're constructing a database within the regulatory innovation workstream?
Yes. So what we are doing is we are gathering all types of information that is publicly available, for example, on the EMA website, but then sorted by product per product. And we are hoping to create a database that is searchable so that we can find the specific topics that we are interested in a very logical way. And yeah, of course, we hope that gathering of all these data can help us within the project to use those data in a specific way.
Thanks. Sounds like an exciting project.
Yeah.
Mark, do you have something to add?
Yeah, maybe, but that's more from a general point of view, being a scientist myself as well. What you see is that regulatory affairs usually is not on the mind of the first part during the drug development process. What you see is that first there's a lot of science, and only until the clinic is in sight, then people start to realize, okay, now we need to have also a filing of the results and take into account what's needed to move into the clinic. And that's actually the point that most, even the biotechs, start to think about what do I need to do and what kind of data do I need to provide. And that's much too late. So there are ample cases of biotech companies who had to move back completely to earlier phases, losing a couple of years even in their development process because they didn't file in the proper way in the beginning. And I've seen examples of biotech companies moving into the clinic, asking about the stability of, for instance, about their antibody, and they just say, well, it's already half a year in the fridge and it still works. Well, that's not the way drugs are being developed. It's nice science, it's good information, but you never get it filed. So my urgent remark is, from the very first day that you start with the idea of developing a drug, keep this in the back of your mind and read the regulations, what's needed, and that will save you a huge amount of time and cost in the end.
Yeah, that's a nice, again, an example of how within Oncode Accelerator, through these overlaying of the work streams and platforms we're trying to accelerate. It's the same with regulatory innovation, with the regulatory innovation work stream. And about that, building the connection between regulators and developers of especially cancer therapeutics. Evelien, can you comment on what is really needed to boost that connection between people, especially early in drug development stages? Connection between them and EMA, for example, or CBG in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think part of the question is, are researchers already aware of the fact that these options, for example, for advice from EMA are in place? And so I think there's a huge potential there to make them aware already that there are pathways you can use in this early phase to get the dialogue starting. And also think about those critical steps in regulatory development of your product, like what are the critical steps in my process, and how do I find answers to the specific questions that pop up? So we are hoping to help with that specific part. And of course, if we can integrate the results from the regulatory science that we are performing within the work stream, that would be a really nice package altogether.
Yeah, and I think indeed that most people think about regulatory affairs that you need to follow the rules. There are fixed guidelines, and you need to just follow and tick the box. And I think especially with Oncode Accelerator, but it are not fixed guidelines. We see continuously improvement, novel technologies coming up, and that's where we can play a very important role. Just recently, it was announced that a lot of the animal toxicology studies may be replaced by organoid studies, by other technologies, by AI. And it's up to us, startup companies, scientists, and organizations like Oncode Accelerator to teach the regulatory authorities what kind of new developments are taking place so the guidelines can be optimized.
That connects nicely to something you said earlier, Evelien, that it's really a joint learning process between the applicant and the regulator. Do you have something more to add about perhaps how that process works and what that really looks like in concrete terms?
Yeah, I think referring to, for example, the use of organoids is very new. There is limited legislation or maybe no legislation yet. But what we really need is a use case, a party that says, I want to, for example, test my toxicity in an organoid model instead of in an animal model. How can I do that? Well, that's a question you can go to a regulator and discuss what is needed to do this. You submit your proposal. The regulators will respond on that, but it's mutual learning. There is no specific guidance yet. So these use cases will really help to bring legislation further both ways.
So we need people to work with us through demonstrator projects, bring forward some use cases, and then we can innovate the regulatory system together with the regulators.
Indeed.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and the need is high, of course, because what I showed in the beginning, that it takes 10 to 20 years to develop your drug. And there's a lot of stuff indeed also regarding toxicology and all the assays that need to be done, which can be shortcutted if we do it in a proper way. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that also optimizing the regulatory affairs is also shortening the timelines for drug development, is reducing the costs, so it has a high impact on society and on the patient. And it's not just what we call as scientists boring stuff that you need to follow some rule. It's a very highly interactive business.
Yeah, I think that's.
Go ahead, Evelien.
Yeah, that's important. You mentioned like I said before. In the end, it is this balance of benefit risk and the assessment of quality, safety, and efficacy, and how you do that. Of course, there's guidelines guiding you, but if you have a good idea how you can prove in your specific case that safety, efficacy, and quality is of good standards, then you can really register a product like that.
And sort of change the system in doing it as well. Well, people are shy today. We don't have too many questions coming in, so I'm going to ask you each one last question from our side. There's time for anybody who does want to ask. Oh, just in time. Thank you, attendees. One question that just came in is, how do you see the timeline for use cases helping with platform validation to the point that ultimately the platforms will form and support one of these pipelines for discovery and development of new drugs? Evelien, would you like to comment?
Yeah, it's hard to say, to really give a timeline, but I think many of these processes can be there parallel. So maybe we can start validating one of our platforms and using the results of that specific case for another case. So we are trying to make it as efficient as possible. Yeah.
And do you think it helps to speed up the timeline if people are already in touch with regulators early on? So
yeah, for sure. I think it's important to make that connection as early as possible. At least you get some input on your process, and you will receive ideas for your next steps. So that will definitely help.
Mark, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's a very fair point. So I would recommend everybody who is starting to develop a drug to go through the guidelines. It's they are available, and you just get you don't have to go into very much detail, but just to have an idea in your mind what's out there, what are we need to comply to, and what does fit and what doesn't fit, and then start a dialogue. And you can do that through us. We are here to help you in that respect. If you have any questions or ideas in that respect, how we can change it, then we definitely are willing to do so. Yeah.
So we come back to the first slide, start with the end goal in mind, and
Absolutely.
yeah, so for people who want to join our program, we're able to hold your hand along the way as you proceed in a demonstrator project working together with regulators. Another question has just come in. Is there one person within a startup who is usually responsible for regulatory compliance? Or is it the whole team? Do you need to hire a specialist? It seems very specialized. So how do you do this? Do you start with a specialist from the beginning, ideally?
Yeah, I think it will, of course, be a case-by-case question. But I think as a startup, at some point, you know that you need more expertise, and you can find that via several ways. But there are, of course, consultants you can ask who have specific questions on your product to guide you in these.
Yeah, from my point of view and personal experience, we do have some experience with a number of companies. Is that it's always not on the priority list of the startup companies in the beginning, but it's very good to have somebody making accountable for it, and that person can see where to get that information. So he or she should read the information available and either contact, for instance, Oncode Accelerator. Please, can you guide me and help me, or hire indeed consultants, and that's very common practice that at a pretty early stage you hire an agency or a consultant to help you, and that's not very time consuming and costly in the beginning. It's just to make sure that you do not make any mistakes in the early part of your development which you will regret afterwards. That's much more expensive.
Yeah, so start thinking about it early. You don't have to have a specialist at the beginning, but have someone responsible for overseeing it who can then discuss with the
coordinating
relevant
it.
parties.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, my last sentence, if you don't do, it will be much more costly in the end than picking it up early. Yeah.
Maybe one point good to say is also that Oncode Accelerator is not a regulator, of course. Again, coming back to the point that this is for educational purposes. So we do help people who join our program through demonstrator projects to find the right people. So in a similar manner to how you've just both explained, we're making sure that you make connections with the right people right from the start. I don't see any further questions coming in, so I would like to finish off by asking you each the same question. Maybe Mark, we can start with you. What is one piece of advice that you would give to developers of cancer therapies or cancer researchers?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, and actually what we have been discussing. But I think it's a very simple take-home message. The current process is far too long, far too costly, and we need to optimize it. So we really need innovation both on the scientific front and on a regulatory front. And as in the first slide, please keep in mind, if I would like to put my drug on the market, how does it look like? And what do I need to do to get there? Yeah, so start with the end.
Well said, thanks.
Yeah, and now it's difficult for Evelien to get a new message.
My advice would be to contact Oncode Accelerator and to see whether we can collaborate.
Very good.
Great advice to end on. Then I will bring your attention once more to our feedback form. We would really love for attendees to share your feedback about this webinar. And we also have asked you if you do have any input about what topics you'd like to hear about in future webinars, whether that's topics around regulatory innovation or other topics that are within the scope of Oncode Accelerator. So preclinical discovery and development of oncology therapies, we're happy to hear it. We'd love it if you follow us on LinkedIn as well. You can find us at Oncode Accelerator. And if you do want to reach out about joining our program, running a demonstrator project with us, you can reach out to demonstrators@oncodeaccelerator.nl. With that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Evelien and Mark, for sharing your expertise today, and we hope to see you in a future webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.